The resource that I get, I'll often see which personalities lead to better to that sort of stable environment. And then I'll often break out pods within the team. So these are people that are perhaps a little bit more dynamic in their mindset, prefer challenge and shorter term tasks. And I take the sort of what I call it a pod approach or a tiger team approach. So tiger team was one of the first things sort of NASA did in the moon landings when things were going wrong. They set up a small tiger team of very experienced people, and they just put them aside and told them one specific problem and gave them a short period of time to fix it. So I use that same sort of principle really when these sticky issues and things come up.
Hi, Richard. Thank you very much for being on today's episode. Get things started. Can you tell us a bit about yourself?
Yeah, hi James, and thanks for having me. So my name is Richard Curtis. I'm a program delivery manager in cybersecurity and technology. My focus is digital identity. So I work within the digital identity space and within the Ministry of Defence at the present. I tend to look after digital identities, making sure they get assured and trusted into all the downstream systems.
As soon as you mentioned Ministry of Defence there, I'm just thinking rigidity, I'm thinking process driven, but we know that identity has to be very flexible and very agile. Like, how do you manage that type of flexibility in like a military environment?
Yeah, so you're absolutely spot on. We obviously have mission important objectives. We have clear timescales and clear dependencies we've got to meet. But I think I balance that sort of rigorous governance and structure with a very clear vision, and then I'll often break down that vision with the team. So we've got an overarching vision of what we've got to achieve, what timeframes and budgets and things like that, but really breaking down that vision into incremental stages, and then empower the team that I work with, along with a few sort of key stakeholders that perhaps aren't involved in the day-to-day, but have a very important influence on the success. And we bring that all the way through, really. And so in those incremental stages, it's very much looking at sort of breaking down that vision and making sure that every increment we can meet that vision. What if we don't? How we go about it? All those good things. And then I'll often do a plan to have more advocates rather than those rock throwers, really. So we know that people are going to, want to move against the time frame, or won't be ready, or there'll be technical challenges or new cyber risks that come along. But it's very much having advocates for the delivery rather than people that just say no. So it's early doors, having a clear vision and breaking down that vision, and then, like I say, just empowering the team to get behind those incremental visions. And there's been often times where they've set the vision themselves. We've seen what the overarching vision is and how do we get there? What does it mean to us? That kind of thing, really.
So the key thing there is you're trying to, is that there's advocates. When you're an advocate of something, you're going to be motivated to see its success ultimately. But so I guess my question is, like, how do you create the advocacy? And I guess you mentioned that involving wider stakeholders outside of the core delivery team. Talk to me about that. What are the type of stakeholders, and how do you start to build that new person in your delivery team, or someone to be an advocate for the project?
Yeah, so it's all the typical tools are in the toolkit, stakeholder maps, that kind of thing. But actually, it's boiling it down to what's in it for me. So as a senior stakeholder, or a stakeholder that's got something that they're really dependent on, this is really going to change their way of working or improve their cyber security. It's bringing them in early doors with that vision and those sort of high level objectives. And it's then asking them to be that sort of coalition for change. And it's asking them to then feed back into other teams and other departments, their own programs, their own systems and their own services, to say, look, this is coming down the line. This is what the digital identity is going to mean to us. And then it's very quickly trying to get people on board as one sort of train in motion, if that makes sense. What I've tried to avoid, and it's very difficult because lots of people have difficult challenges and their own operational goals and targets to meet, and the threat landscape changes all the time. but it's in the military. There's something called a BLUF, which is very common, which is a bottom line up front, and we often articulate out to stakeholders what is the BLUF, what is the bottom line up front to them, and making sure they're aware of what's coming down the track, and it just creates a wider team ethos, and so that's very much the way I like to move it forward. Really, it's all about empowerment and giving those stakeholders a say. I've always found there's nothing worse when I'm a stakeholder, someone coming to me at the end saying, "Oh, look, I've done this for you, and you've got it next week," when they haven't listened to my thoughts or what I want. So yeah, it's just bringing those key stakeholders in, the ones that are really going to benefit from this or really need this, may not even know that they need it, and really bringing them on that journey, really, and then just having that sort of coalition to move forward.
That bottom line up front, are you angling that more towards the impact of misdelivery, or are you kind of doing that, that what's in it for them, that positive outcome for that stakeholder, for that department?
So when you
often do you kind of blend the two?
Yeah, so when you're vision setting, I very much have the BLUF on the positive side, what's in it for them. So the bottom line up front is this is going to change your way of working by XYZ. It's going to improve your cybersecurity by XYZ. But obviously, when it comes to the criticality, when things are going not to plan, shall we say, and that will always happen, they're familiar then with the BLUF. They're familiar with the way it's set out. So it's very easy to articulate succinct and clear problems and explain to them what the issue is. And so I use it in two ways, really. One for that positive vision and message and how it's going to change them and what we need them to do. But one in also that very clear sort of either instruction or information exchange on what's happening and why it's happening.
That's interesting, because when you think about programs, delivery programs, etc., they typically stall, I guess, at the first sign of uncertainty. You've got teams that have an objective, they know the plan, they come across an unknown. So I can see how that BLUF is going to help them keep moving things forward. So I don't know if you can give us an example where you've used that BLUF and it has helped you get across that first sticking point or that first unknown in a project. And equally, maybe have there been times where you've used that BLUF, bottom line up front initiative, but you've still had teams teams freeze on that first point of uncertainty? How have you adapted to those situations?
Yeah, so just to unpick that, I mean, teams freezing, getting sort of stuck in the treacle of delivery, and always sort of thinking, all of a sudden the problem turns into a mountain rather than a molehill. I structure the team in two ways. So I tend to have quite a stable core team that have that long-term objective, and they're working on the day-to-day. And the resource that I get, I'll often see which personalities lead to better to that sort of stable environment. And then I'll often break out pods within the team. So these are people that are perhaps a little bit more dynamic in their mindset, prefer challenge and shorter term tasks. And I take the sort of what I call it a pod approach or a tiger team approach. So a tiger team was one of the first things sort of NASA did in the moon landings when things were going wrong. They set up a small tiger team of very experienced people, and they just put them aside and told them one specific problem and gave them a short period of time to fix it. So I use that same sort of principle, really, when these sticky issues and things come up. And I use them in those sort of delivery pods and take those people outside of the main mechanics of the machine moving forward and get them to fix that specific small problem. And then it's all about sort of, again, that feedback loop, really, and bringing them back into the wider team, giving them the headspace to do what they need to do, getting the objectives done, bring them back into the team and move it forward. So I think having a stable core delivery team has always proved really important for me. And I think in a very volatile threat market like cyber, it's quite important to have that. A key example, to address the second point, was we were delivering MFA for mod, and obviously we needed to uplift some policies, and we did that. But that was obviously, policy is always something that looks backwards. So policy is also something that sets a rule in time as of today, but it's only ever looking backwards in terms of policy. So what we were aware of is the new rules coming through with NIST, how NIST was going to affect how we deal and conduct ourselves with allies and interoperability. And we made sure that the policy working group that was established were able to think about moving forward and what the new policies, so having like a horizon scanning mindset, really. So we very much looked at the sort of authentication methods, how it'll impact the users, but we also looked at that future proofing. Because obviously if Mod are going to make an investment in something like MFA, we don't want to constantly be iterating it and changing the methods of authentication and things like that, because logistically to get MFA into the hands of everyone that works for Mod across the globe is quite a challenge. So we want to make sure that if we're making an investment in multi-factor authentication, that we do it right, we get a good return on that investment by making sure there's longevity and making sure that we meet the policy of today, but also what's likely to be the policy of tomorrow. So it's looking broader, looking outside of the UK, looking at what our allies are doing, looking at what industry is doing. Industry played a really big part in it because obviously there are ears to the ground. They know what's coming down the line. And obviously our policymakers, with how they work with NIST and the UK government, were really important advocates for the rollout as well. So it's kind of looking at that really, and very quickly had to create a pod aside, set them the key task of uplifting the policy to make sure that we weren't going to implement something that's going to be retired in 6-12 months, and making sure that it was, dare I say, one of the sort of best in breed efforts to make sure it's as cyber secure as possible, whilst also listening to the operational challenges. I mean, you got people in deserts, in embassies and ships and all sorts, and snowy landscapes. Not everyone works in a nice office, with air conditioning, and it's making sure that we can help those users really, because ultimately we don't even want them to think about how they use the technology. We just want them to use it as a second nature. But we don't want to slow down the operational effectiveness of a command unit because the system's glitching or the system's not working. So it's just bringing it back to that really, and looking forward for future proofing and that return on investment.
So that's a really interesting example, because I mean, as you're explaining that, I'm there thinking, yeah, you might have a USB-C adapter here on my laptop here, but I doubt I've got the same form factor on a rugged device out in the desert, or like you said, in the Arctic, for example. I guess when you had to impose that targeting, that pod onto that, like at what point did you think that you saw, I guess, the challenge coming up? At what point did you act upon it? And once that pod has delivered that very specific challenge, how do you kind of get that pod back into the core team running of the projects? Like, how do you bring them back into the team?
Yeah, so I think identifying the pinch points, stress points, whatever we want to call it, is really important. And you'll see a trend in people's behavior and pressure points, and it's noticing that in the way people are working. So in terms of policy pinch points and technology and cyber, we obviously get reports on what's happening in the landscape and why it's important and all this kind of stuff. And sometimes that can be a little bit overwhelming. So you get a lot of noise and a lot of information coming in, and pressure to go faster, but also to go more effectively and that sort of stuff. But in incredibly complex environments, that's always very difficult. So it's just using those pods, and very quickly when we set the team up, and the first Tiger team I did in this instance, I actually pulled everyone into the same room, and I asked for people that wanted to be a part of it. So I, in my mind, already had a view of who would be in those teams, but I wanted to check that they were wanting to step up to do it, because it's quite an intense thing to be part of a Tiger team, 2 full weeks, sort of all working together 6-7 hours a day on one subject to try and solve a problem. It can be quite stressful. Whilst I'd identified who I wanted in the Tiger team, I also wanted to see if people would stand up to want to do it. And actually, I was surprised a couple of the quieter voices wanted to be a part of it, and I was really pleased by opening up to the room to see them be a part of it. It sort of taught me a lessons really, that never to judge a book by its cover, and actually some of the more quieter voices in the room, the introvert personalities, have we all know it, they have a lot of value to add, but it's giving them the space to feel comfortable to add it. And I wouldn't have put them in the Tiger team initially because I thought that it would just be too intense, but straight away a hand went up and said, yeah, I can do that, I want to be a part of that. And it was really nice to see. And ever since then, when we first set it out, there's been there's always situations where you've got to drop people out and put them into target team, or people leave, or the teams change. It's just having that sort of problem solvers, the broader thinking really, scattered throughout the team. I'm not one for big, huge, sort of chunky, heavy teams. I quite like the agile and enthusiastic people, and I think that's kind of how I like to work. And I think you can get a long way with enthusiasm. And I think as long as people have got the knowledge and are open-minded enough to listen and to speak to other people, because military, you would expect is incredibly hierarchical. It's just you listen to the boss, you do what the boss says, you get it done. Obviously, we've got a lot of veterans and ex-military, and that's absolutely the way they're trained and how it's done. And it's just bringing that into the sort of commercial world and the civil service, and just blending it all nicely together so that you get the best out of it. Because military people are so highly trained, they're so well and effective in how they deliver things. But that doesn't mean they have all the answers, and it's just giving other people the space to flourish. So, yeah, I like to set it out right from the beginning, really, and get people to engage, put their hands up, who wants to be a part of it. And naturally teams form and bond. You got to look out for cliques and sort of, the usual people buddying up together, and then all of a sudden you get a division. So you manage that, but overall, by having a small team and a clear, succinct message, the time boxing and all that kind of stuff, it just helps a lot.
I guess what's been the biggest wild card, if you want to call it, mid project, and tell us about how you were able to respond with your team without blowing the timeline out the water.
Well, you can imagine wildcards come quite frequent in cyber, and I think that's only ever going to increase as we move away from the cost of cyber attacks becoming much more expensive for the organizations, but actually cheaper to inflict a cyber attack. So one of the things that I find wildcard example is where you make assumptions and you do all the best planning in the world, and you think this is all going to work, and then an assumption just doesn't come true. The key thing I do is to take a breath, just release the pressure valve, and just not dive straight in and try and solve it all. Just take that 5-10 minutes, try and understand that sort of common information picture. So what is true now? Why is that wild card come about? What is that output of that? And then always try and work out of that what needs to be true to move forward. So it's a way of filtering out the noise. Some examples of that in terms of the pressures and those sorts of things. We had some wild cards come in on a system that didn't connect properly with another system. I won't go into the details. We'd always assumed it would, but it didn't. And we all of a sudden, the whole team, you could see everyone going, "Oh no!" Almost turn grey in fear of it all. And so it was just very much quickly, right, let's just take a breath, guys. Let's have a cup of tea. It's a bit cliche. Keep calm and carry on.
Don't panic.
Don't panic, Captain Manning. Yeah, absolutely. But it's really working out what that common information picture is, working out what is true now, and then very quickly working out what needs to be true for us to get back on track. And it's just having a little bit of taking the noise out, a little bit of taking the pressure off, and just provide that clarity, really. I talk a lot of pride in working for the Ministry of Defence. I talk a lot of that with my teams, because I think you can be really, if you can't take pride in sort of helping your country defend itself, and we play a small part, but it's an important part in cyber. We're not on the front lines. We're not doing the dangerous stuff. We're mostly behind desks, but we know that it affects those people that are doing the dangerous things. And so I talk a lot about pride, and I talk a lot about how we can take pride in our work. And I think that emotional connection to the work can help deal with those wild cards. It can also inadvertently ramp the pressure up. So I try not to overdo it. The systems aren't going to switch off overnight if we miss it by a day. But also it's just bringing it all back to that sort of personal level, why we keep doing it, how we impact it. So yeah, we've had wildcard examples of things like systems not talking to each other when they should, but it's just very much quickly, take a breath, have a virtual brew together on Teams or whatever, and try and work out what needs to be true moving forward from that sort of common information.
Looking at your sort of background, before coming on to today's episode, you've worked on like homelessness policy, education reform from memory, and obviously now military identity. I get the impression that the way you were able to act and the way you're able to manage the team has obviously come from that type of experiences, and there's pressure no matter what environment you work in. I guess like what working in such sort of different and diverse backgrounds, like what do you think connects all these environments when it comes to leading under pressure?
Yeah, so I think this is something that I find sometimes difficult to answer, because I get asked a little bit, what's leadership, and what's your leadership style? How do you bottle it and make everyone else follow it, or how do you consume it from other people? And I think it comes down to sort of your mindset really, and how you carry yourself. And I always think that I've got to be the gatekeeper of the standards really. So even though I'm having a bad day and I may want to shout and scream or bury my head under the pillow, I think it's you can't offload that onto your team. And also you'll have internal disagreements, you'll have internal pressures and things like that, but it's kind of being in it together. So I think where I've worked before, I've always naturally been drawn to quite large transformation programs or high impact delivery and things like that, whether it's cyber or policy, and an identity now. I think just that's how I like to operate. And I think if I was to be put in a environment that wasn't like that, I would probably struggle. And I think that's a reflection I've done on myself really, that if I was to go and take a different role that was a little bit less impactful, or impactful in different ways, and I couldn't see the vision, I couldn't get behind the strategy and something I truly believed in, probably wouldn't be as add as much value as I could. Whereas if I work in an environment which is quite high pressured in a weird sense, but I can relate to, then I think I'm not saying if you enjoy your job you never actually work a day in your life. I won't go that far, because it definitely does feel like work. But I think just having that mindset of being involved and embracing it, and I think just being a part of teams. I've had good and bad teams, and I'm sure they'll say the same about me. And we've had lots of highs and lows over my career, and I think just having that resilience and that ability to just keep things moving forward is a personal trait. If I was in something that wasn't moving forward, was more of a service that was perhaps more static, lots of very important things, they would feel the pressure, but I probably wouldn't fit in that mold. So I look at self-reflection quite a lot, in the sense of what do I want from a role? What do I want to get from it? How can I add value? And I think if you carry yourself in that way, and you're always looking to improve yourself, then you're in with a good chance of doing the right thing. I've been fortunate to work with some really inspirational leaders, SROs, directors, executives, even the guys on the ground, not just in defence, but in some of the other places I've worked as well. People that were having impact, and just effort. I bounce off other people's effort. So I think you can have people that give energy to an environment, and if you have too many of them, then it's a bit like trying to manage a box of frogs. But if you get that balance right, you can often move forward. Obviously, there's the red flags that come up that you've got to look for, but overall, that's kind of I see myself as the gatekeeper of the standards and how I want to move it forward, really.
When you are evaluating a team, or whether you're just kind of coming to a new project, or you've had movement in the team in itself, what kind of red flags do you look out for for that person that won't thrive in chaos? Because you clearly talk about, like, you want to create advocacy, you want to get people like emotionally invested in the project within reason, right? There must be some telltale signs out there for people that you just think, no, that's not
Yeah,
going to fit into my Tiger team ethos, right?
yeah. So I'll just come back to you. You said the word chaos, and I would call it constructive intensity, because chaos implies that it's all going everywhere, and I think that there is that element when you first land in somewhere. So I look for two big things. I look for a blame culture, and I want to get rid of that. And I look for what I call rock throwers. So people that will constantly throw rocks at other things. They'll talk people down. They'll blame other teams for their failures. They'll never say I. They never say we. It's always them, and they, and he or she did this, or they don't do that properly over there. Really, blame culture is a big thing. And I've had people join, and the first thing they do is, the people I've come to replace, they weren't as good as me, and I just quietly have a little word saying, look, we don't do that here. We just don't do that. Blame culture is one big red flag. Everyone gets a chance, so as long as they change their behaviors, that's fine. I think internally or externally, never undermining others is really important. I have to create that safe space for people to quiet voices in the room, for people to say things. I've worked with some really brilliant neurodiverse people that struggle to do certain mundane activities in life, but actually you give them an architecture drawing and watch them go. They were the project we delivered was better because they were a part of it. It was more successful because they were a part of it. So I want to get rid of blame cultures, rock throwers, that sort of stuff. And what really gets me going is the people that I'll often go around to the team when I first join and just say, what can I do for you? What is your number one thing I can do to make your job easier, to get you more success, to get this going on the right path? And they'll say something, and me being me, I'll always say, great, I will do that for you, but I'm going to need you to do this for me. So we create a deal, basically, right at the beginning. I'll do things for them. I'm often seen as, I get this quite a bit at the moment, where they say I'm the icebreaker, the big tanker that's going through all the ice in the Antarctic, and I'm the little boat at the front breaking all the ice, making sure that the tanker can go through. So I'm sure it's meant to be seen as flattering, but I can't help it. It's just making sure that you're all on that same journey, really. And I think that's the underlying thing for me. Identify those red flags quickly, make the changes if you have to, give people a chance, give those quiet voices space to express themselves, and just be really passionate about it, really drive it forward.
So I guess then if you're allowing the teams to be really agile, you obviously go around, there's lots of collaboration there. There's nothing being hidden or swept under the rug, basically, by what you're describing. I guess in the world, in mod or in defense in general, or these very critical environments, sometimes flexibility can open the door to risk. As I'm thinking about things like like secure by design, for example. So where does that balancing act come into it? Because you still need to remain secure, although you're obviously trying to be agile at the same time.
Yeah, so secure by design works well with agile, and I'm a huge advocate for it. So basically, if you imagine a stick of rock and it says Blackpool through it, well, if we were looking at secure by design, our delivery mechanism says secure by design through it. And I say that to everyone, and I'm full of these cheesy lines, so apologies. But I'm really clear that whoever the secure by design lead is, the security lead, they are the one that sit next to me to sign things off, because if it doesn't meet secure by design, it's not going forward. And that's absolutely a culture we bring in. So I give that security lead the visibility, the real life benefit, and just constantly reiterate why it's important around the security protection. So I think a common misconception in cyber is that to go quicker or to be more agile, to change things, can often lead to more risk. But if you create an environment where you own your mistakes and you get it wrong, but you're quickly looking to improve on that, in essence, that's kind of what secure by design is about. It's about being security conscious whilst you design things, whilst you're moving forward. So I always have a really strong relationship with whoever our security lead is. You need to be totally hand in glove with them. And it's not good cop, bad cop, or they're blocking delivery, oh dear, or anything like that. It's very much together. This is how it's got to be done. And that would be my absolute one takeaway, really, from a cyber perspective. Constantly think about secure by design, constantly think about how you can improve supply chains, why it's important, how your data is being protected, all that good stuff. Bring your security experts in, except you don't know all the answers, and get those security SMEs in the room and help them drive that culture. Because if you can do that from the beginning, you're on the way to a good winner, really.
So, I mean, all the time hearing throughout all this and your experiences, and obviously how you're running the teams in digital identity for defense, it's effectively having clear vision, being motivated to deliver. But I mean, is there, if they were to take away some bit of advice, or what advice would you give to the listeners?
I would say you got to enjoy your job. You're never going to enjoy it all the time. So look at yourself a lot, as much as you can, really. Look at what you can do to make it better. Look at what your vision is. Are you communicating clear enough? So I think it's just that reflection, really. And I think, I'm just one small cog in a very big machine in digital identity. And, we've got a really great team around us. We go through changes. Mod a fantastic organization, but obviously it has its challenges. So I think wherever you go, wherever you work in cyber, it's never going to get easier, but it could get better. And I think if you just constantly look at reflection and try and improve yourself, which is what I kind of do, you've got a real chance to shift the dial. I don't think you'll ever go 100%. The dial will never shift to safe. So it's all about being as best as you can, really. And as long as you look at yourself in the mirror every day and you've done the best you can, then, the rest will take care of itself, I think.
Richard, thank you very much for being a guest on today's episode. Look, if anybody wanted to reach out to you, kind of get some advice about how could they build their equivalent of a Tiger team, or perhaps how they could improve their own companies moving forward, or their team structure moving forward, what's the best place to reach out to you?
Well, I think, going through yourself, James, in the Cyber Fusion Forum, the great podcast and work you're doing is a good place for knowledge. So feel free to reach out to that community. I'll be an active participant in it, and we'll find each other and we'll move forward on that.
Well, thank you very much for your time, Richard, and we will hopefully hear from you soon.
Thanks, James. Thanks everyone for listening.